Hi, and welcome to another edition of Prodigy Search Presents. I am Mark Resch Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. Today, we're in for a real treat. I know I say that every time, but today we're really in for a great guest. And I'd like you all to introduce to today's guest, Kevin DeShazo. Kevin, you've been a longtime friend of Prodigy's, but I'm thankful to have you on and just to chat with our audience, our friends, our colleagues in the industry. So thank you again for being here.
I'm thrilled to be with you guys.
Kevin, he should be well known to all of you. He brings incredible breadth of experience and knowledge to the table, and I'd say he's incredibly well known in the college space. Everybody in the pro space should know him in sports. But if not, I'm going to give you I'm going to embarrass him a little bit here and tell you a little bit about his story. The founder of Fieldhouse Media, partner at Culture Wins as part of Giant Worldwide, which we can certainly get into a couple of those things. Obviously, part of a podcast, which we'll talk about. And near and dear to my heart, you bring several years of staffing and recruiting. You're a talent acquisition guy at your core many moons ago, but nonetheless, before you became this rock star, you were a lowly recruiter like myself. So it's good to talk shop with people like yourself, Kevin.
Absolutely, man. I love it. And we all have a story, right? We all have a journey of how we got to where we are. So looking forward to chatting for a bit.
So I'm curious, right? I want to jump in and again, I've told you, I've read I read a lot of your stuff on social, digital, your newsletter, listen to your podcast with Mark, and we'll talk about that. But I'm curious, and people out there, how have things at Full House and Culture Wins, your podcast with Mark, how's all that changed? With your partners, your colleagues, your other stakeholders. There's normal, which we'll talk about that word. What's evolved? How have things changed over the last, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks? I mean, you're usually a travel guy. You're on the road quite a bit, but maybe including the travel, but not only including travel. What's changed for you?
A lot. And, it's been interesting. So I spent for the past 10 years, I've spent most of my time traveling in the college sports space, some of the pro, but mostly college sports, doing, with Fieldhouse Media, it's doing social media training for college athletes, college coaches, administrators. And then kind of built Fieldhouse into Culture Wins, which is leader development, culture building, communication. And that's part of the giant world. They do the business side, I do the sports side. And so the travel is obviously gone, right? People are no longer bringing in speakers to do workshops or keynote addresses. Now I was supposed to be at the Final Four, giving a talk to coaches and ADs, going to the games, didn't get to do that. So that piece of it has changed, but the purpose of what I'm doing still hasn't changed. It's just the tactics, the daily how-to. And so now it's all switched to video call, whether that's Zoom or Microsoft Teams, Google, whatever. People still need those things. So organizations are still wanting to train and educate their student athletes on how to use social media better. So on the Fieldhouse side, we're still doing that. Especially with, as we're recording this today on April 29th, the NCAA announced they're going to start, they're going to announce some of the steps they're going to start taking around name, image, likeness, right? Which includes student athletes profiting off of their social media profiles and presence. So still doing that. But most of my days are spent on Zoom calls with teams from probably 8 in the morning, sometimes till 8 or 9, 10 o'clock at night. Because teams still want to get better. Leaders are still trying to get better, and they're trying to get some guidance on, in the middle of this situation, what does that look like? How do we stay connected? How do we communicate? How do we keep building culture? And so the how of the work, so to speak, has changed, but it's still happening, right? People still need these things.
You've talked about, and great segue, I mean, you've talked about how this is new territory for leaders, right? And how your reaction or your response to them when they're unsure how to react or what to say or what to do, your reaction to them is, that's okay, or some form of that's okay, that's understandable. In other words, this pandemic isn't something we've ever been before. People will talk about the recession or 9/11, and that's fine that there's some comparables. None of them, by the way, are apples to apples. So what should leaders be doing now so that they are prepared? So your answer to them, if they come to you the next time a pandemic comes, is, well, how did you react prior, right? How are you kind of coaching leaders so that they're not just remembering, but they're kind of taking it all in, they're notating, whatever, and the recording, so that so history doesn't repeat itself. What's your kind of guidance to leaders that say, yeah, that's okay, but ... Yeah,
it's a great point, in that nobody's ever led through this type of situation. Yeah. Right? Like I said, 9/11 different, 2008 different. All these other situations were bad, and they were their own version of crisis and disaster, but not where the whole world was shut down for months at a time. And so it's a situation on a scale that none of us in life have ever experienced. And leaders feel a burden in general, right? Leadership comes with a burden You know the decisions you make impact your organization, your people, and that comes with a heavy burden. It's not a complaint. That's just part of leadership. But you also feel the burden of making the right decision and having the answers. You think your people are looking to you for answers always, which is not true. We feel that pressure. Most of the time, they just want some reassurance that you're thinking of them, that you're working on a plan, that you're aware of the situation. And so for leaders, like, it's okay to not know exactly what to do. There is no right answer. For most of us, we're just trying to make the best of what seems to be many bad options. And so what we've been talking about with leaders and teams is, yes, all this happened and everything changed, and you no longer, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Okay, we know that. Let's stop talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And not to ignore it, but we can spend all day long talking about what we can't do. That doesn't change our day. We have a day in front of us. The question is, what are we going to do with this day? And I think for most organizations, kind of like us, like the purpose of an organization hasn't changed. Their day-to-day looks different. The how, communication looks different. Relationship looks different. Execution looks different. And so for us, it's been for leaders to have some perspective. And this sounds cheesy, but like, whatever they've experienced in life, they've overcome it. Mm-hmm. Right? They're sitting in this chair today, and it may not have looked how they wanted it to look at all times. Yeah. But they are where they are. They've overcome everything. So far, depending on where you're at, you're X amount of weeks into this. Right. So far, like in Oklahoma, we're 4 weeks in, maybe 5, could be 42. Right. We've all lost track. But we're a month into surviving a global pandemic. People have done things they didn't think they would ever do, were capable of doing. So to help them remember, like, hey, in the midst of the fear and anxiety, like, you're capable of more than you realize. So let's stop talking about what's gone wrong. What requires your best today? What requires your energy today? What requires your focus today? And that's how you move forward. Like in the middle of a tidal wave, right? You don't like stand out with your arms up. You're going to get knocked out. You get narrow and you lean in and you pivot and you focus and you do the right next thing. And so it's trying to help leaders maintain focus and perspective, because if they can do that, their team follows. Right? If they seem panicked, they seem freaked out, their team's going to freak out. And so for them to have that perspective in the midst of the storm.
You know, 2 or 3 moments ago, you mentioned the word communication, and that's again, we can talk about that for probably a different conversation. That's an hour-long conversation just on that word and that topic. But talk about communication, especially from the college athletic standpoint. Again, one of your areas of expertise. I don't want people to pigeonhole you as the guy who's just incredibly well respected within college ranks, but within college athletics, because you're right, you were supposed to be at the Final Four. Not there. What should, I mean, if there is an AD or there is somebody in the athletic department or there's a coach that happens to listen to it, what should ADs and coaches be doing from a purely communication standpoint?
Yep. People need a few things. They need encouragement, and they need vision, and they need time. Like in the midst of stress, that's generally like they need, hey, where are we going? Like, do we have a vision? Do we have something we should be shooting for? They need consistent reminding of that. They need time, which is just presence with their leader, with their boss. And they need specific encouragement. Hey, I see you doing this. Not just, hey, love having you here, but like, hey, I appreciate your efforts on this. That mattered. We needed that. That made us better, whatever it may be. And so for the leader, time looks different now, right? You can't just stop in their office. So it may be a text. And so as your team is operating through the week, if someone does something that's noteworthy, don't just move past it. And we're getting unintentionally transactional and everything because the relationship piece is gone by nature of the beast, right? Again, we can't just go have a team lunch or stop in the office or talk in the break room. Every Zoom meeting is about work. It's about progress. And so it just feels all transactional. And so to take time, like, hey, I see you. I appreciate you. Like, well done. Thank you for that. Are you doing okay? Just simple things to check in with people. And the other piece is this is the difficult thing I think for leaders right now is there's a balance between communicating enough, communicating too little, and over communicating, because all those are possible. And if you under communicate, your team's wondering what's going on, right? And typically negativity fills that gap. Right now, fear fills that gap. Am I essential? Are we shutting down? Did we not get the PPP loan? People are just freaking out. Because there's not communication. And from a leader's perspective, we're like, oh, we were just busy. Sorry. we're not trying to not communicate. They were focusing on solving problems, right? And making progress. Communication became secondary. On the other side, if you over communicate, it's every time you get, so if you're an AD, every time you get an email from the NCAA or from the conference, you're just forwarding on. It's like, I talked with a department recently, talking with one of their coaches, and he was like, I was like, did you see this email? He's like, I've stopped reading email because we get 25 a day from the AD.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know what to do with all these emails. And so there's information overload. And so you've got to have some discretion and discipline on what you share, when you share it, and who you share it with.
Are there, and I was going to ask you that because the over communication thing, and listen, I, like any other leader, I'm not just calling myself that. Hopefully I've had the ability to lead people and currently lead people, but I do struggle with that over communication thing. And I've worked with people that have as well, which is, you're right. I mean, what's too much transparency? What's too much, I hate to say pulling back the curtain or, showing how, showing how something's made, right? But the dangers of over communication in that, trying to decipher for the reader of that, for the person who's intaking it, what's important and what's not. I guess I love that you brought that up because I was worried again, and I get worried when I either read things, hear things, or even I dialogue with my boss of what are we communicating enough? Not, it's like it's the nursery rhyme, just enough, too little, or too much communicating, right? And so I'm glad you brought that up because I am always curious about over communicating as a danger. What are the pitfalls of over communicating?
Well, and you got to think about it. We in the leadership chairs have a different perspective for the most part than the other people in the organization. And that's by nature of the beast, and that's okay. So we receive communication. Typically we can see it for what it is. And we have a better understanding of the organization at large and what that information means for the organization. We can process that information properly. To somebody else, they see the information, don't understand the organization at large. They just know their little bubble, their little pocket of the organization, and they see that, and they start. And we shared it with good intent. Hey, we're trying to be transparent, try to keep you guys in the loop, and it actually causes people to panic or freak out for no reason. It's just because they don't have an organizational understanding, and that's okay. They don't have to. And so for us as leaders, it's realizing we've got to know yourself to lead yourself, and know your team to lead your team. If I share this with them, what is their risk? Do they need to know this information? Is this actually useful for me as a leader? Is it useful for the team? Do they have to know everything? Because you hit the key word there is transparency. Transparency doesn't mean sharing everything.
Yeah.
Right. Transparency is mostly explaining why you're doing the things that you're doing. So if they can get a bigger understanding and more buy-in. It's not we're going to open every little piece so you can see in every conversation, every thought process is like, well, they're not in the room for a reason. Doesn't mean they're being withheld, right? But they're not in that room making those decisions for a reason. And so we have to be really, really careful. Is this information going to help our people or going to unintentionally harm our people?
One of the things that, we talk about normal, right? And that word, the new normal, that's come up, and perhaps, I'm a Latin guy ad nauseum, right? It's been a lot, right? And you see and hear the phrase, and frankly, it's just white noise. I don't even know what that phrase means anymore. So I kind of gone past that, right? But you talked about this potentially. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but potentially being, the Great Reset. And while I hope everyone listens to your podcast, the Sports Leadership Podcast with Mark, for those of you who had not, tell us what you meant by that idea, because I bought in. I love the rationale, the conversation you and Mark had about the Great Reset. What was your thought process behind that phrase? If I could replace that with the new normal, that would be super. But talk to us about that.
Yeah, I like you, I'm tired of the phrase new normal, and I just don't buy into it because this isn't normal, right? Nothing about this is normal. And I think language really matters. And so to call it normal is to imply like this is how it's going to be. It's like, well, that's just not true. It's a season, right? And seasons end. So this is a season, and we'll come out of it. A new normal will come, whatever that looks like. When that happens, we don't know. But for me, I've been calling it the Great Reset, meaning everything is shut down. Right? Again, like my brain is really struggles to grasp the fact that it's 2020 and the world is shut down. Like that is the most bizarre thing in the world to me. And so, but it's a massive opportunity for an overworked, over-hustled, overextended people and culture to be forced to hit pause and hit reset. So people are hitting reset on how do I work? How do I interact with my family? What about my friendships? What are my real priorities? What do I actually value? To hit reset on all these things, or they're not, right? And so they're reevaluating everything, and they're going to come out of this better, or they're just saying, nope, I'm ignoring it, and I'm just going to either put my head down and work until everything's okay, or I'm just going to go watch Netflix until they tell me life is back to normal.
Yeah.
And those people aren't going to come out of it better. And I don't say that to shame people. Or you can choose whatever path you want to choose, but you have to own the results of those choices. And so for so many of us, I think it is a great reset. And I'm fascinated to see, what does work look like? Now, I think we've realized remote work isn't the answer, but it can be useful. For some organizations, it works. For most, it doesn't. But many may be able to go to a hybrid, say, you know what, like this could actually work pretty well. It gives our people some freedom. I think a lot of people, it's amazing how many coaches and CEOs and high level leaders are now saying, man, this time I've never had this much time with my family, because they've convinced themselves that they have to work 90 hours a week, which is a lie. They're just trying to show that they're working hard, as if that matters.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for their family going forward? You know, does this reset how that relationship all looks, and when the work-life balance?
Cool. Let's stay on that work from home comment, because it's interesting, and I don't want to make you repeat yourself, but I want to go down that path. And again, not something we need to spend a significant amount of time on, but you speak with people, you read on social media, right? And I'm sure there's memes out there, right? But the common refrain, again, tied to work from home or remote work, is, you know, oh man, you know, I guess bosses are now seeing how everybody can work from home, right? That's, and I often think that, okay, there's probably some of that goes on, right? Bosses maybe historically, old school, maybe you don't trust, you know, your employees work from home, that they're getting their work done, et cetera, in some cases. But I often look at it from the other side. I'm curious to hear your take on this, that bosses, just like me, just like you, anybody else, they like the interaction, right? I love going in and grabbing a coffee with a coworker, stopping by their office, knocking on the door, and just chatting, going out to lunch. You said this earlier, going out to lunch with them, just chatting with them, or going in the conference room. Hey, can we do a quick 5 minutes in the conference room? And not that those things can't take place now, but what's your take on that? Kind of the negative kind of a look at the work from home thing. Oh, great. Now my boss knows I can do it from my sofa, TV on in the background, and get my job done. I mean, that's not the whole point of this, right? It still is work from home, but you know, the work part of that doesn't go away, right? So the phenomenon of it being a negative of, I think we've all earned their trust now, right? They're all going to revert, you know, not old school. Now there's going to be no longer office buildings anywhere in the world.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. I saw an article today. So like crowded offices are going away. Well, maybe.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen with anything, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so let's not make these grand declarations, but I think you're right. It's remote work works for some people. It works for some organizations. But it's my opinion, it's just not the best way. Remote learning is not the best way. Now, it obviously depends on the topic, on the subject, but we're made for relationship. Like we're made to be connected. And I think we've realized it's interesting how many people I've talked to who were frustrated with like their work culture, their workplace, all this stuff. They desperately miss it. And they realize, you know what? I was complaining about a lot of things I didn't need to complain. I just miss my coworkers.
Yeah.
And so like that relational piece, that ability to just stop in someone's office and have a minute chat, to go to a team lunch, like those things matter. And can you get work done home? Absolutely. Some people may work better from home. Some people work much better in the office. Like I hate being home to try to get work done. It doesn't work well with my personality. I'm just so easily distracted. So I've still been coming to the office. It's an empty building, and I come in usually half a day, so I can focus and get things done. Otherwise, I've got 3 kids running around and my wife and a dog and everything else. And so that's the thing that people don't. And this has been an interesting season because you've got maybe a husband working from home, a wife working from home. They're trying to teach their kids, right? Now they're being teachers from home as well.
Yeah.
And so it's pure chaos. And I'm seeing actually on some level more burnout than we had before, because people feel like, well, my phone's right there, my computer's right there. So I don't think remote work is the answer, but I think it can be used effectively at times.
You know, you mentioned culture. You're a big culture guy. I'm a big culture guy, and I say that try not to be facetious in saying that both of us are. But the question has come up, right? And I've thought about this a lot. How do you, or how does anyone, you know, try to build or maintain or mold a culture via all those Zoom or Slack or Skype? And again, not that you need to, culture doesn't need to always be built in person, but how do you try to do things during this environment with that, you know, capital C or lowercase c culture?
That's difficult, right? Because again, I would say culture drives everything. It's going to drive the way you work, drive the way you communicate. And so what you're seeing now is some teams have great culture 6 weeks ago, and they're doing okay right now. It doesn't mean things aren't difficult, because it's difficult for everyone, but they're fighting the right battle, right? We all have one common enemy. The healthy teams are just fighting that common enemy. The unhealthy teams are fighting that enemy and fighting each other, right? Because they didn't have trust, they didn't have relationship. And so one of the things that we've been doing and encouraging teams to do is, you know, we're having enough Zoom calls all week long with our teams. We're scheduling one where we just hang out. Like we have one call a week as a team, 30 minutes. We have a system we call 5 gears. So it's about work-life balance. And 3rd gear is just connection, which could be playing golf, going to dinner, a convention, right, where you're just hanging out and networking with people. But we're doing that once a week for 30 minutes. And the two rules are you can talk about anything besides work and coronavirus. And so that's just a way to remind people, like, hey, we're people, relationships matter. So little things like that of making time to just connect with your team as a team. I think I know this seems, some of this can seem weird, but we got to make do with what we have. Shooting text messages to people like, hey, I appreciate you. Little encouragements. Again, those may seem unnatural. Some personalities, that's what they do anyway. But we've got to connect and build a relationship, which is really the driver of culture, the best we can. Otherwise, we're just all going to dive into our work, and we'll be productive, but we'll be exhausted. We'll be burnt out. We're not going to feel appreciated. And so that takes extra effort in this season, right? Communication takes extra effort. Relationship takes extra effort. But if you value it, you'll figure out a way. So it's, again, one of those things. We can complain about things we can no longer do to create culture, or we can figure out, okay, this is what we have. How do we stay creating culture in the midst of this? And the best teams are doing that, right? They're staying connected. They're communicating, laughing, right? Making things fun. And so I think if it's a priority, it's a priority.
You talked about the one, and I love that, by the way, and I might have to borrow the one Zoom, the one connection with your team per week. You can't talk about work or the coronavirus. And an idea crossed my mind, when it comes to Culture Wins, the newsletter, when it comes to the podcast with Mark, did you guys ever feel that you personally, individually, or as the people that work with you on those two projects, was there a balancing act of how do we ignore this in our daily newsletter, in the podcast? I know you've recorded a couple, I think I've listened to a handful, but you've recorded a couple episodes that did talk about coronavirus. I mean, did you think about, do we do the newsletter? Do we do podcast ignoring the elephant in the room? Or is there, I guess, where did the switch kind of go off of that? Hey, we got to address it, right?
Yeah. So the newsletter, the daily email, it was interesting because this is, again, we're probably 4 or 5, 6 weeks, kind of depending on, in terms of this being not just a conversation, but an actual impact on us, right? Thinking really from the time that it kicked off here in Oklahoma City when the Thunder game with Jazz got shut down, and that was kind of the tipping point for the U.S.
Sure.
And so for me, early on, like most idiots, uninformed, I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. And I didn't know, but I saw a speaker starting to cancel. I'm like, man, I'm not afraid to travel. Like, if you need a speaker, I'll fill in. We'll figure it out. It's like, and so again, this was in March, like early March, not like 2 weeks ago. And so I'm like, I'm just not going to live in fear, like, whatever. And then you start to see, like, once the Thunder game, I was like, okay, this may be pretty serious. And then March Madness, and I was like, all right, this is no joke. Let's, shut everything down, whatever. And then it's, I feel, I don't know if I say obligation, but like the idea with the daily email is just to give people a thought of the day, encouragement, perspective, whatever it may be. And I don't know if I wrestled with it, but I had the thought, like, do I just act like everything is normal? Yeah. Or do I talk about fear and chaos and crisis and adversity and overcoming and obstacles, and make that just address it and have, like, let that be the theme in this season. But then there was definitely a point of, what, we're all like, part of what I want to address is what I think people are experiencing, which usually we're all experiencing the same thing, right? So most of what I write about is what I'm thinking about, struggling with, learning, whatever. So it's like, well, this is what I'm dealing with, and so is everyone else. So let's not, what am I learning that can maybe help people in the midst of it? And now is the part of, maybe it's just personality, but part of it's like, when do I stop talking about it? Yeah. Right? Like, when do we start acting as if things are not normal, but like, when do we start getting more normal messages and stop making excuses for behaviors and all sorts of stuff? But Mark and I had the same, it wasn't a huge discussion, but it was, hey, who can we talk to that will add value? And so we talked with Brian Bedford with Cisco, and he's led remote teams for years. How does this impact him in the sports world? We've got a few people coming up from the PGA Tour and from different schools and conferences, talking about how they're approaching it. And mostly, again, part of that is the intentionality is reminding people, because we can easily get in our silos, and we know this is impacting the world, but we feel like it's just impacting us. But when we can hear other people tell their story and their struggles and what they're doing to kind of keep moving forward, it's just a reminder of, like, oh yeah, they're facing this too. I don't need to sit here and have a pity party and woe is me. Like, they're in the same boat, and here's what they're doing. How can I learn from that? So just trying to be a resource to help people in the midst of it.
And you know, it's funny, the podcast situation, and I listened to Brian's and I thought that was fantastic, but I think it's interesting. That's just another means of hearing from people that you're curious. What are they experiencing? How are they reacting? I told somebody the other day, I said at the beginning of goes back to 4 weeks. I said in on a Facebook Live conversation, it was about ticket sales, just because I said, what are people in ticket sales doing? How are they communicating with their prospects, their clients? I just want to learn. I don't do anything in ticket sales. I'm a recruiter, but I was curious about, and there was like there's several hundred people on that. I'm like, how are these people doing their job? And then, so again, it's not just me now. It's not just me. It's not just Prodigy, it's not just recruiters. Everybody's experiencing something like that. So it's kind of listening. And listen, you said something about the newsletter, and I laughed because and we subscribed for a few years now, and I started, at first it was just me, and then I would share it with a few coworkers. And what I always liked, not that I don't mind the philosophical ones that, again, are very much, they're very impactful, but there are certain ones that you send out that are abstract, and there are certain ones where you tie in something about your family, your homeland. And so I'm always intrigued, right? With the Culture Wins newsletter, you reference your boys, I think, and I look at it and I say, well, how can people, again, in the sports industry, but across other industries, use experiences like that? How they're navigating things at home, which maybe things at home are different than what they were before, but with their significant other, with their kids, coaching Little League, how can they apply those things to their job and their career? Because I think people, to your point, you use the word silos. I think people say, well, I coached Little League and here's how and they forget to use any of those things that work when they go to their job the next day, or here's a disagreement with my significant other, and here's how we kind of resolve the issue. And they don't take it to the office, where sometimes I'm like, there's a missed opportunity, I think. But what's your take on that? Because you do bring that into your newsletter.
Yeah, because for me, it's all one and the same.
Yeah.
And because you're right, like you're spot on. People think leadership is your 8 to 5, right? I know 8 to 5 doesn't exist really anymore, but we think leadership is our job. It's what we get paid to do. We don't think about it as a mindset or a lifestyle of how we parent our kids, how we interact with our spouse, how we coach Little League, which, by the way, trying to apply all the stuff that I talk about to 8-year-olds playing baseball and basketball does not work. So yeah. There's got to be, our 8-year-old basketball team, we won. I don't think we won. I think we lost every game. And I added it up. I think we lost on the season combined. It was like 212 to 25. I mean, it was not good. So all the things I talk about don't work on 8-year-olds. But to your point, it's like, one, I need to be, and it's not natural for me. So I'll say that, like, it's been a learned thing, because my tendency is to put everything. I love my family, love my wife, love my boys. It's easy for me to put most of us, I think, to put most of my energy into work. And at some point I realized, well, that's not fair. Like, they don't get my leftovers. I don't get to go do fun, cool stuff and then just be home. And so part of it is like, I have to be intentional in every circle of influence, with my wife, with my kids, with my friends, the team, when I'm with an organization. But the other piece is just an awareness of, if I and this is a learned thing as well. So this is not a natural for me. Because I would always watch speakers. I'm like, man, where do they come up with this stuff? Like, and it could be from a commercial. It could be from, now maybe they're just making things up, right? Like, I had talked to a guy the other day, and they probably didn't. They're just saying that for the effect of a story. But it's like, it's stuff with their kids or their spouse or whatever. I'm like, where do they come up with this stuff? And I just realized, like, all the best stories they're always happening. We just have to pay attention. And so for me, it's an awareness thing of, like, if we're climbing, we've been trying to go to state parks around Oklahoma during the middle of this, just to get outside. There's nobody around. And I'm like, but there's stories within that, right? So the other day, it was my 4-year-old wanting to be the line leader as we're hiking through this state park. He's like, I'm the line leader. And he's taking off. We're like, guys, you can't just take off. Like, you got to lead at the right pace. And so I'm like, oh, that matters. Like, leaders have to lead at the right pace. And so it's just trying to be aware that all this stuff is tied in together. I have to just be intentional in every circle.
I wanted to talk about your next book, but before I do that, and again, the goal isn't that this is an infomercial for you, but I do think there's value in a lot of this, and I think the Leadership Interrupted was a book that we've come to really enjoy, and I love what you did there, Kevin. It's daily, right? And not literally January 1st and then November 2nd. Each literally there's lessons, or there's stories, or there's for 365 days of the year, which I really like, because the way you approached it, and by the way, the examples you use are varied. But I would bring it to a staff meeting, and we would just kind of talk through, something that I was reading through, frankly, at 7:30 that morning. And I thought, well, okay, at the 9 o'clock Monday meeting, it's different than, okay, what's everybody working on, right? It's something just different. Let's talk about it. And again, I started doing that, and truthfully, because I wanted everybody in the staff, down to the intern, and up to the CEO, knowing that it applies to them. It's not just somebody with a fancy title that they read Leadership Interrupted books, right? Or those types. So my thought is, we can't not talk about what's coming up next. I've seen a little bit, I've read a little bit. What's the next book? What's your goal and intention for what's coming out soon?
Yeah, so the story behind it is funny. So I'll tell the story and then kind of talk about the book. But it was early January, Saturday night. I don't know what I was doing. I was watching TV with my wife. Like, I don't know what we were watching. Like, and something in me, with my vast background of being a lumberjack, I thought about chopping wood, and I don't know why. I don't have a reason for why that came into my head. And I thought to myself, maybe I smelled my neighbor actually does have a wood burning fireplace. Maybe I smelled their firewood. I love that smell. And so maybe I smelled this firewood. I don't know. And I thought to myself, I wonder what that process is. I bet you don't just chop a tree down, right, and put the wood in the fireplace. And so I Googled the process for putting wood in the fireplace, realized it's a 9 to 12 month process in order for that wood to be ready. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. So it takes time for that wood to be useful. Well, that means someone was out chopping it 9 months to a year ago, like knowing there's no real value in that day, right? Like, they're not using the wood that night to keep them warm. Like, this is like for a year from now. And that's a certain mindset and a commitment. It's like, you've got to be committed to that. Okay. That's cool. And so then I just fired off a tweet about how you don't chop wood, which I generally do. If I have a thought, I just put it on Twitter. But it was about, if you don't chop wood because you need it today, right? You chop wood so that you have fuel for the fire tomorrow. And I tied that into culture, meaning if your culture is going to face adversity. If you've not done the work to chop wood and to build relational trust, to have communication, to build influence with each other, you're not going to make it when adversity hits. You're not going to have fuel for the fire to get you through adversity. So I just fired off that tweet late on a Saturday night. I actually was talking about it with my wife 2 days ago, trying to remember all the story. I'm like, this was like 10 or 10:30 at night. She's like, no, it was on like a Wednesday afternoon. I'm like, no. And I found it. It was January 11th at 10:27 at night. I fired off that tweet. And then I go to bed and I'm like, I think I just found my next book. And she's like, I'm sure you did, because this is my brain.
That's the way you work.
Every day I have a new book. That's right. Like, every day I'm like, I wrote a book today. She's like, no, you didn't. But I thought about writing a book. And so I wake up in the morning and that tweet, and then this is a weird thing to say, but like, the tweet kind of blown up. And I was like, okay, that resonated with people. Like, there's something there. And so then I used it a couple days later in the daily email. And I usually get maybe 1 or 2 replies to that email a week. Like, and I'm not right. That's not the point, right? Yep. The point is to get replies. I'm not asking questions of people. That one, no exaggeration, got probably 30 to 40 people saying, I just printed that off and gave it to my kid. I just printed that off and put it all around all these different things. I'm like, okay, 2 for 2, like, something about that message is resonating. I sat down the next morning, Tuesday, so January 14th, and wrote it in 4 hours.
It's amazing.
There's a coffee shop below our office. So I went in and got a cup of coffee, put in headphones, and that is not how I operate, by the way. Like, for me to focus for 4 hours is a supernatural thing. I've usually got 4 minutes of focus. And so I just cranked it out. It's short story fable style, right? It's like 8,500 words. So it's not a 40,000 word book. And that's just the idea is, like, if any type of success, whether that's within your craft, whether that's within your culture, within your family, it requires that you show up each day and do the work. So it's called Keep Chopping Wood. I don't have a release date yet, but we're recording this on April 29th. It will be before the end of May. So Great. It's at keepchoppingwood.com. For people listening, you can on the launch team, or it'll have a button there when it's live.
Well, listen, I appreciate that overview, and we'll be sure to get it. And I've always been appreciative of you, because listen, your role and your career has expanded to the extent that you're, again, part of all the things that we talk about giant worldwide and everything you've done, from your lowly levels of being a recruiter and talent acquisition person to where, again, going to the Final Four, talking to ADs, but your ability to talk to, again, small shops, 10-person companies, boutique, agencies like ours, and on a grander scale. Again, the tremendous work you do on the college scene, social and otherwise. I know social's not the only thing, but that's why I, again, appreciate the first book, and now this upcoming one, because I think it applies. My point is, it applies to everybody. And I think it doesn't need to be just, yeah, great, give this to an AD or a head basketball coach in the NBA, and they'll give it, and they'll be the next Jimmy V, right? I mean, there's elements that can help a small mom and pop shop in there. And again, it can be applied to the home life too, but that's what I've always appreciated about you, Kevin. So thank you for sharing that on your book. And appreciate your time today. Again, I know you're incredibly busy. I know you're not traveling as much, but I know you're, again, like you point, your mind never stops, and I'm sure there's a lot of other things that you need to do. But I know people will take great value from this interview. They'll take a lot of lessons, and I hope they apply them. And I think, again, during this time, but also moving forward, yeah, this is a pandemic centered conversation, but most of this, if not all of it, moving forward will still be, 6-12 months from now, 6-12 years from now, still has a place. So really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Please stay healthy and safe.
Hey, you guys as well. Appreciate you so much.